So here we are, 7th graders, in the last section of Chapter 7, and here's what we're going to learn today. Another way to factor. I know you're also excited to learn how to factor by grouping. So you're going to learn how to factor by grouping, factoring completely, and using factoring in real-life problems. So looking at your core concept, factoring by grouping. To factor a polynomial with 4 terms, notice that grouping is with 4 terms. You're going to group the terms into pairs, and then you're going to factor the GCF out of each pair of terms. Look for and factor out the common binomial factor. This process is called factor by grouping or factoring by grouping. So how do you do it? Well, first off, let's look at A and B. If you look at A and B, you will notice that in these problems, you have 4 terms. Because you have 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. So here's how it works. You're going to take and look at what they have in common, or what factors they have in common, and group them in pairs. So what I have done here is I have grouped x to the third plus 3x squared, and I have grouped 2x plus 6. Make note that between them only can be a plus sign. You cannot have a minus here. You can only have a plus. So now you factor out a GCF. So I look at x to the third plus 3x squared. What can I take out as a GCF? I can take out an x squared. That would leave me with x plus 3. Then the plus comes down. What can I factor out of a 2x plus 6? 2x plus 6, I can factor out a 2. And that would also leave me x plus 3. Ding, ding, ding. This is a huge key point. If you do it correctly, the binomials that you have left will be the same. So x plus 3 and x plus 3 will be the same. If one of these are different, you didn't do it right. So now you take the factors you've taken out and you put them together in a binomial. And then the other binomial is just writing down x plus 3. You only write down one of these. You do not write them both down, you just write one. So your final answer would be x squared plus 2 multiplied by x plus 3. Now if you could factor this more, then you would have to do it. And we'll get to that in a second. Look at B. B, I want to factor by grouping. So if we look at the first 2, x squared plus y, there's nothing in common there. But x and x squared would have something in common. So I'm just going to regroup them. Now I'm going to group them, put them in parentheses, and I'm going to factor out a GCF. So in the first set, I would take out an x, and that would leave me x plus 1. Plus, and then I take out a y, and that leaves me 1 plus x. Now that is the same thing. So now I take my factors that I've taken out and I put them together for one binomial, x plus y, and then you bring down what's inside just once, which would be x plus 1. So my answer would be x plus y multiplied by x plus 1. All right, let's do another example. This one's harder. We're going to factor by grouping since there are 4 terms. Now there's something to make note of here. You cannot do this. I put these in parentheses and then do this. You cannot do that because you just separated the negative. That cannot happen. That is like math illegal. Cannot do that. Cannot do that. Illegal. So here's what you would do. We're going to bring down the 2x squared minus 50, and then we're going to leave negative yx squared plus 25y in parentheses. We cannot separate that negative. And then we're going to group, but we're going to leave that plus sign in the middle. And now we factor out. What can I factor out of 2x squared minus 50? I can factor out a 2 and get x squared minus 25. Plus. Now here, actually I'm not going to put a plus because notice I have a negative right there. If a negative is in my first term, you must factor out a negative. So what can I take out of both of those terms besides a negative? I can take out a negative y. And I'd be left with x squared minus 25. Notice we're left with the same thing. So my answer will be 2 minus y and x squared minus 25. But wait a minute. We have not factored completely. X squared minus 25 can be factored into two binomials. X plus 5 and x minus 5. So my final answer will be 2 minus y multiplied by x plus 5 multiplied by x minus 5. Make sure you factor completely. So now we have seen the polynomial x squared minus 1. That can be factored into x plus 1, x minus 1. This polynomial is factorable. Notice that the polynomial x squared plus 1 cannot be written as the product of polynomials with integer coefficients. Once again, if you have a minus and then a perfect square, then you can break them down. If you have a plus, you cannot. This polynomial right here would be unfactorable. A factorable polynomial with integer coefficients is factored completely when it is written as a product of unfactorable polynomials with integer coefficients. That sounds really confusing. All it means is you're going to continue to factor until you cannot factor anymore. And here is your summary of everything you've learned. Number 1, some ways or guides to help you factor. Always check for a greatest common factor first. 3x times x plus 2. That is a greatest common factor. You could look for the difference of two squares or a perfect square polynomial or trinomial. You may factor something into binomials. Or you might have to factor with grouping. These are all different ways that you could factor a polynomial completely. So example number 2, factoring completely. We're going to factor this completely, so let's look at A. A is 3x to the third plus 6x squared minus 18x. The first thing we must check for, always, factor out a GCF. Bam, factor it out. What is your GCF in this trinomial? It'd be 3x. If you factored out a 3x, you'd be left with x squared plus 2x minus 6. We then factor into binomials, if we can. So we pick x, x. Since we have a negative 6, we have to be plus and minus. So we either could do 6 and 1, 1 and 6, or negative 1 and 6, or negative 6 and 1, or negative 3 and 2, or negative 2 and 3. Now if I pick 6 and 1, let's see. Nope, that does not give me 2x. Let's switch them around. 1 and 6. That gives me a middle term of negative 5x. So nope, that doesn't work either. 3 and 2. That gives me 3x minus 2x. That does not give me what I want. This cannot be factored anymore. So this is my answer. 3x times, or multiplied by, x squared plus 2x minus 6. Now we go to the next one. B. Can I take out a GCF? Absolutely. I can take out a 7x squared. If I take out a 7x squared, I'd be left with x squared minus 4. Well, wait a minute. X squared minus 4 can be factored into binomials. X plus 2, x minus 2. Now, by the way, if this had been a plus, this would have been your answer. You couldn't have gone any further. But there's my answer. 7x squared multiplied by x plus 2 and x minus 2. And here's what I love. Putting it all together within an equation. Equation. So let's solve this equation. 2x to the third plus 8x squared equals 10x. Step 1. Get the equation solved for 0 and put it in standard form. So I need to subtract 10x on both sides. That would give me 2x to the third plus 8x squared minus 10x equals 0. Step 2. Factor out a GCF. Now what's the GCF in this case? We can take out a 2x. If I factor out a 2x, that would give me x squared plus 4x minus 5. Now, I factor into binomials. X and x, I want a negative 5, so let's try negative 5 plus 1. Well, let's see. That gives me negative 5x. And 1x, well, that's not what I want, because that gives me negative 4x. I want positive 4x. So, I don't think it's going to let me erase this, and of course it will not. So I'm just going to cross this off, and that gives me 2x, and I'm going to switch them around. X plus 5, x minus 1. And that does give me now 4x. I set each of these equal to 0, which you should be able to do this part in your head. If you solve each of these, obviously the first one, if we divide both sides by 2, that gives me x equals 0, x equals negative 5, and x equals positive 1. So my answers would be 0, 1, and negative 5. Our last problem, a real-life problem, of course. A terrarium in the shape of a rectangular prism has a volume of 4,608 cubic inches. Its length is more than 10 inches. The dimensions of the terrarium in terms of its width are shown. Find the length, width, and height of the terrarium. First off, we're talking about volume, a volume right here. So we know the volume is that amount. We have length, width, height. Well, we should know that the volume is length times width times height. So we could do 36 minus W times the width times the height. Now the volume would give me 4,608. Now, make sure you don't do this. Some people are like, oh, well, they're already factored. I set them all equal to 0 and solve. No. Remember, this has to be 0. So you're going to actually have to multiply all of this out. So I'm going to distribute the W, and that gives me 36 W minus W squared multiplied by W plus 4. Well, if I do that, that's going to give me, let's see, 36 W squared plus 144 W. Then I distribute the negative W squared. That gives me minus W to the third minus 4W squared equals 4,608. I have to get everything equal to 0. So, and in standard form. So first would be negative W to the third. Then, I'm going to cross it out. Then I would combine 36W squared minus 4W squared. That gives me minus 32W squared. Then I would have plus 144W. And then if I bring over the 4,608, that gives me minus 4,608 equals 0. Instantly, we have 4 terms. Ugh, and you're like, gross, this looks horrible. It isn't that bad. You have 4 terms, and let's group them together. So what can I take out of negative W to the third minus 32W squared? There's a negative, so I have to take out a negative. I'd take out a negative W squared. That would give me W plus 32. And I just realized I made a mistake here. This should be a plus. Yep, my mistake. That happens to all of us. 36w squared minus 4w squared would be 32w squared. And if I take out a negative, then that makes it w minus 32. My mistake. Now, what can I take out of both 144 and 4,608? Well, I can take out 144. And the hint is because whatever I get, I have to have w minus 32. So I know I have to take out a 144. So that would give me w minus 32. Hey, look at that. Now I put them together. Negative w squared plus 144 and w minus 32 equals 0. But we have more to go, so I'm actually going to redraw this on the next slide. Now, what have I always told you? If we have a negative here, what must we always take out? We must take out a negative. So I'm going to take out a negative 1. And then everything else comes down. Am I done factoring? No, you're not done factoring. Because we can factor w squared minus 144 down even more. So this would give you w minus 12 and w plus 12. I now have three things that I have to set all equal to 0. Now I'm not going to do that because you should be able to do this in your head. This gives you w equals 12, w equals negative 12, and w equals positive 32. Now, the width cannot be negative 12, so we're going to cross that one out. So if we plugged this in, now this is where it's still not easy. I have two values of w. So if I plug in w equals 12 to all three of these, and then I plug in w equals 32 to all three of these. So let's see what happens when I plug in 12. I get a length of, let's see, 36 minus 12, which is 24 inches. I get a width, which is 12. And I get a height, which is, let's see, 12 plus 4, that gives me 16 inches. If I plug in 32, I get a length of 4 inches, a width of 32 inches, and a height of, let's see, 32 plus 4, 36 inches. But we have to look back at our original problem. Our original problem said our length had to be more than 10 inches. Well, this length is 4 inches, so this would not be correct. So my answer would be this. The length, width, and height would be 24 inches, 12 inches, and 16 inches.